Welcome to Bites of Light with Angel and Seth Rohr.
We provide bite-sized nuggets of wisdom to feed your soul, expand your awareness, and free your mind to help you create a more beautiful today and a brighter tomorrow.
Join us in our magical kitchen as we serve up another high-vibe snack for your soul.
All right, welcome to another episode of Bites of Light. Today we are joined by Suzanne Rollen. She is one of the authors in our new upcoming collaborative book called Bytes of Light, Evolving Leadership for the Spiritual Entrepreneur. And we are very excited to have her here today. Suzanne and I met just a few months ago on a trip to Teo for another collaborative book with a friend of ours. And it was an amazing experience. I know that for me, the first time I saw Suzanne, I just saw her light shining so bright. And then they assigned us buddies to kind of just to help keep track of everybody. And sure enough, she got assigned to be my buddy. So I was like,
Yay.
I felt so grateful to have a buddy who wasn't half squirrel. So I didn't have to chase her around all the time, figuring out where she was at. And two, just someone so easy to be around. So your chapter in the book is something that is very intriguing to me because it's not something I personally have a lot of connection with. And it's not something that we've actually had come up on the podcast here yet, and it's that connection to the ancestors and utilizing that in your journey. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you kind of came into that awareness and what that's kind of been meant for you.
Sure, yeah. I guess actually the first thing I remember, so my grandfather, the two that I'm closest to are my paternal grandparents. My grandfather actually died before I was born, about a year and a half before I was born. So I didn't get to know him as a kid. And my grandmother lived until I was about 13. And I think my first experience was very shortly after she died. She started coming into my dreams. And then suddenly he did too. And I was like, well, that's interesting. I had never met him. And here he is, like all of a sudden showing up with her in my dreams. And most of the time, the messages were like, basically that I'm always with you. Like in the dream, I'd be in one room with them, and then I'd walk into another room and they were there again. And I was like, wait a second, how did you? And it was like, I'm always here with you. And I think at that time I was pretty shut down as far as, I was raised in Methodist church and had pretty traditional Christian values and understanding, and anything outside of that norm just was like, we didn't talk about it, and we didn't, it wasn't part of our experience. And so I just thought, okay, that was just a dream, whatever. Like it was like I knew, but I didn't quite get it, or I didn't want to admit it, I guess, that there could be something else, that was really them. And through the years, I just kept sort of feeling that, especially with my grandmother. And then it was in 2016 and 17 when everything just kind of shifted in my life that I opened even more. I started feeling these pulls in my body, like I'm supposed to go do this thing. And I didn't understand it because I hadn't been listening to my intuition. And one of them was that I needed to go to Sedona for the gathering of the shamans. And I'm like, okay, why, I don't have the money for that, whatever. And I kept kind of putting it off. And then finally, there were a bunch of synchronicities that just kind of lined up. And it was like, okay, I'm going to do this. There were all of a sudden the money started showing up. I had friends that were like, you got to go, and actually handing me money to go because they knew that this is what I needed at the time. And when I got there, actually before I went, I was trying to explain this to my parents why I thought I needed to go on this trip. And my dad was like, no, I think I said something like, I just know it's right. It just feels right. And so I really think I need to go. And my dad said, well, you sound like your grandfather. He used to say, figure out what's right and do it. And I was like, okay. And then when I got there, the first night, part of the way I got to go was as a volunteer. So that saved me some money. And so the first night when I got there, I was helping to set up the merch tables, and Stephen Farmer was there. Are you familiar with him?
Yeah, he's actually coming on our podcast next week.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Anyway, so he was one of the speakers there. And so we were setting up his merch and his Oracle deck and all of that. And he walked by and was like, hey, if you all want to grab a card, you can just take a card and it's yours. You can keep it. And I was like, oh, all right. Well, the card I pulled out was the eagle, and it says, do what's right. And I was like,
Wow.
okay. So I kind of was like, Papa, like, is this you? And then, so the next day, actually, the other thing that happened, and this is where I met Stephanie and Jeremy. I was working at the sign-in table, and they walked up, and immediately before they even said their names, I was like, I know you. And I was like, no, you don't. And Stephanie was like, I felt it too. And I was like, okay, all right. Well, the next day I got to experience shamanic journeying for the first time. And Stephanie wasn't leading the guided part, but she did have her big drum there. And so she was coming around. And I was, all up in my head, busy head. I couldn't focus. The squirrel was active. And I couldn't focus. And Stephanie walks over me. Of course, I had my eyes closed, but she was just like directly over me with her giant drum. And it was like, and immediately the visual started, and it was this eagle flying over, and I was like, Papa, and it was just like clear as day. I was like, okay, that's him. And he guided me through this beautiful journey that I started seeing kind of a path opening up in front of me. And it was throughout the next few weeks and then several months beyond that, I started seeing some of the things he had shown me, like in my actual life. And I was like, all right, there's something to this. But one of the things was at the end of the weekend, Stephanie was telling me all about this trip to Teo. And she was like, well, this one's full, but I know we're going to go back. So, if you want, we'll get you on the mailing list. I think it would be a really powerful experience for you. And so I was kind of excited about it. But of course, I was like, okay, well, whenever the time comes. Well, on the way home, I get an email from her, and she said, hey, we had 2 cancellations. We're offering half price. I've already checked the tickets from Austin, and they're only $100 to Mexico City. And,
Wow.
and she's like, you got to go. And my first thought was, again, like, well, I just spent all my money going out to Sedona. I don't have anything to get to Payo. And when I got my mail that had been held while I was traveling, I picked it up and I opened, there was a check from insurance that I had filed a claim for, I think 6 months prior, and had forgotten about. And it was within $10 of the amount that she quoted me. And I was like, okay. So anyway, so that was
synchronicities.
Right. So that was what guided me to Teo. And when I was there, of course, there's all the eagle symbolism that just was like calling to me. It was just, and so I got like this little obsidian eagle, and just, it was the whole time I felt his presence, and my grandmother's too. But in that case, it felt, she was a little less tangible. Like he was just right there. And shortly after that, I found a group in Austin, a women's circle that does shamanic journeying every week. And after that, it was just like week after week, these connections, this guidance just kept coming through and leading me, and everything. I'd have these heavy things. I was in the middle of a divorce. I was, all of these things that I was going through, and every week I'd tap in, and it was like clarity and guidance and feeling protected and held and seen. And it was just this very powerful experience. And to continue that on through the next year, I was starting to see these places in Africa, and thinking, well, I'll get to Africa someday. Well, the eagle, my grandfather, kept flying over these rock formations and whatever. And again, synchronicities started showing up and taking me to these places that I'd never been before, and like dropping people in my path that had these connections. And so I ended up in Africa September 2018, and again started seeing these things that I'd been seeing in my journey with my grandfather, with the eagle. And was taken to this rock formation and introduced to the grandmother rock. And it was just like my body felt that moment. I was like, she's been showing up as these rock formations all this time. She was showing up in Teo for me with the pyramids and the obsidian and all of this. She's my path and this grounding force in my life, just holding me and guiding me. And it was just like everything kind of clicked. And then we got up to the top of this rock formation, and there's these eagles flying over, and I was like, all right. So anyway, it was just like, it just kept happening this way. And I was seeing the place that I was is what I was seeing. And like, there's no explanation, no logical explanation for that, right? So, it was just kind of like just telling me over and over, like, this is real. You have a deep connection with these people, and they're guiding you and they're showing you what makes your life more magical and more alive. And so anyway, I could keep going. There's story after story. But
Well, it just goes to show that when you start doing this work, you do have to document, and you have to go, oh, okay, well, that happened. Oh, and then that happened. I remember when I started on my path, and these synchronicities started showing up. You have to check yourself, and
yeah,
is this real? Am I crazy? Am I making it up? Is it just a coincidence? And these loops, these phrases go over and over in your head. But I found as soon as I started writing it and documenting it and say, I kept a journal, and in those moments I would go back to my notes and go, no, actually this is consistent now.
right.
And you finally get to a point where you're like, I can't deny that seer vision anymore. I just can't deny it anymore.
Yeah. When I was being called to Africa, and I actually got this book about the white lions from Linda Tucker, and there was a whole other set of synchronicities with that, but that could take another hour. But anyway, I got her book, and there were all these things in her book that I had seen in my journeys. And that was part of how it was like, okay, there's this connection so strong. And so I started underlining things in my journals that I kept about my journeying, right? And the other thing that I had as far as validation was, after I journey with the women's circle, we, if we choose to, we can share what our experience was. And so I had shared all this stuff all along the way. And so when it started happening, even they were like, didn't you talk about that? And I'm like, I did. So it's like I had this external validation from these other people too, that were reminding me that, so it's,
those are very useful for breaking through the ego.
Right.
The ego that says, no, that's not real. You can't see it with your eyes and hear it and touch it. That's not real.
Right.
So having those things written, seeing it happen time after time, having somebody outside of yourself say, no, I saw that too, or look at the pattern that's happening. It helps break the ego down and allows the heart to just kind of take charge and start to override the brain that we've given ultimate authority over the last, almost all of our life, because we tried to follow our heart early on and we got in trouble for it, or were told that's bad and that's wrong.
Right. And a lot of it, I mean, my father's an engineer, my brother's now an engineer, but they're very scientific minded, right? And so they want evidence, they want, which of course now I've had my own evidence with this, but at the time it was hard to prove it. And if I were to say something like that to them, they'd be like, okay, like,
right.
So, but now I'm with people who understand it and can support me. And it's not to say they would have been mean about it or whatever, but I think they just wouldn't have understood it. And I felt like as a kid, I know part of that was what shut me down. And it certainly wasn't intentional. The love was there, but it was just, it didn't make sense to them. Right. So,
well, humans can only comprehend at their level of awareness.
Right.
And so when you bring something to them that is, well, what they may even consider magic.
Right.
How does their brain comprehend that? If our brains, we're the ones experiencing it and we can't even comprehend it, how do we expect somebody at a different level of awareness to understand it? And
my dad
was,
I feel like he was beginning to open to more of it in his later years, but by the time I really got to a point where I was comfortable enough in my own journey, he was already well into dementia. And so it was, he was in a different reality, but it was, although there were things that he would say and, I'm like, okay, now is this just in his mind or is he actually experiencing something, and it was so
you had the different level of awareness while he was going through dementia. This is your father we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so with you having this, other awareness that you've already played with and understand that there's different realities and we are multidimensional beings, that must have been fascinating to witness and hold because you were your father's caregiver.
It was. And
so to step into that space, knowing that he's accessing other realms while you're caretaking, like that must have been a pretty wild experience for you.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it was such a jumble. Of course, there's the grief of watching him deteriorate and change. I mean, he was always such just like a brilliant mind, and even keeled and gentle and generous, and he had just such a beautiful personality. And watching that fade away and get so was difficult. It was really sad, and there were times when I just felt angry, like, what? How could this happen to him? But at the same time, I think I came in, I actually had hoped to put a little bit more of this in that first chapter, but I just didn't have the space. But, sort of, I was able to see sort of this magic to it that I think most people couldn't.
Yeah.
There was this other understanding, gave me some peace when I think other people were stuck in the apparent dysfunction of dementia, right? And
yeah,
there'd be times that I'm like, okay, he's seeing, like, there were these ladies that he talked to, and I think they were maybe his aunts or some people that he grew up with, because he really enjoyed being around them. I don't think it was like lady. My mom used to joke about his other women, and I'm like, no, it doesn't feel like that. I mean, she was kidding. She didn't think that he was actually, but I was like, it doesn't feel like that. It feels like elders. Like, these are women that he looks up to and that he, kind of cherishes from, so I kept thinking maybe it's his aunts or.
Well, and then wouldn't it make sense that the divine feminine would step in to hold in that space?
Right. Yeah. I mean, and he saw his
he had his spiritual caregivers, and then he had the physical caregivers, which you did for him.
Yeah. So,
and I think holding people through that kind of phase of their lives, there's so many lessons that come from being a caregiver in that capacity.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much growth that comes, and we know that those who dig the deepest shine the brightest. And I do believe that is why you've been able to cultivate so much light in your own being, because of some of these experiences that you've had to go through. And
I've been, go ahead.
And just stood up and faced them and had the courage to walk through those spaces.
Yeah. And I've been going through it with my aunt as well over the last year. She's still hanging on. Like, I just want to say, bless her heart. Like, she has no real quality of life anymore, and hasn't for months, but she's still with us. And I feel like she's working through something on some level, and it's not something I can understand. But she was sharp until she had a heart infection that I don't know when it started, but they discovered it in June of last year. And then that led to a series of strokes. And so the strokes have really impacted her cognitive ability, and as well as her physical ability. So she's been in the bed basically since last, unable to even turn over. And now her mind is kind of somewhere else too. But I've been able to sit with her through that and kind of hold space and just kind of show up where she is, which is, people, again, it's like early on, people were just trying to fix her and this and that. And I'm like, yes. And, if there's something that we can do to help her, absolutely. But I mean, physically, but I think more of it was just kind of showing up with her and being, if she says she sees somebody, because she sees animals and other people and whatever, I ask her questions about them instead of trying to shut that down. Right. Like, I want to be where she is and experience, kind of understand, get a little insight into what she's experiencing, and just sort of hold her through that, because she's had some really terrifying experiences. I think in some cases she's reliving her traumas, and so just to be able to hold her and witness her and remind her that she's safe through like these childhood traumas and these different things that have come up for her again in these last several months, as she's locked in this strange place in her mind, some in spirit as well, right? But yeah, so it's been a very powerful journey for me, and I've learned so much. And in fact, one of the things that's been a blessing with it is I'm learning now to recognize my self-worth where I am, and my let go of guilt and shame, because I've watched both my dad and now my aunt kind of living their worst nightmares. It's like they've created the reality now, and as their cognitive abilities have shifted. And so they're carrying all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, all right, what can I let go of now? What can I clear
Right.
up now while I'm
what a beautiful lesson that they provided for you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, it breaks my heart that they're walking through that, because they've lived really good lives. They're they're very loving, generous, kind people. And they've done a lot of good things in the world. So to see them stuck in this place where they think they're not enough and they haven't done enough and they haven't, whatever, it's kind of mind blowing. So it's a reality check for me.
Oh, what's fascinating to hear, like from the outside your story, when I translate it, for me, it's like we talk about the generational trauma that we have kind of stepped in and accepted that we are the ones that are going to be breaking that. Mm-hmm. In your case specifically, you have two of your living relatives in spaces where they're literally verbalizing and experiencing other realms, and you're being given the opportunity to ask the questions, to hear what they're saying, so that you can go inside and cut those cords and get rid of the generational patterning and trauma right now. Like, that is huge work. And it's not just huge work for your family, because when one person heals, you're healing your lines, your ancestral lines above and below. And it also helps heal the collective. Like, you're doing some huge work. And when you're in it, sometimes you don't understand to the degree.
Right.
But that's some big work that your family has stepped into, and that you have accepted the call to cut those cords and release the trauma.
And another perspective that I'll offer on that is, like, we all, a belief that I hold is we all sign up for something when we come here, right? We kind of know what we're getting into to some degree. Maybe we can't know it all, but your dad and your aunt may have signed up to go through that piece, to mirror that for you,
to prepare
just
you,
like your grandma and grandpa said, we're going to be there to hold her hand while she witnesses that. And together there's this collective generational effort to finally do that. And you're just kind of that last vessel that had the strength. You had the power to come and be the one to finally cut it. And it's very impressive. I mean, if you accomplish nothing else,
you're done
on your time down here,
you
will have shifted huge energies and collapsed timelines and brought back all of this, this trauma from that DNA line.
Like you said, the three generations. I have been this journey. I mean, obviously I was being given the awareness through these different trips that I was guided to take, to Sedona and Teo and Africa, where I really started believing that, okay, my grandparents are there, my ancestors are listening and guiding and holding me. But it's really been these last few years. I mean, it was the summer of 2020 when I went there, and I stayed for 15 months with my dad, and then came home for part of a year, and then went back last August and was there through January. And I'm about to go back next weekend. I'll be heading back for round 3.
Round 3.
My aunt and my mom. So, we'll see. But my relationship with my grandparents during that time, I mean, it was just like almost every day I'm like, help, like, there were these moments where I felt like I had no clue what to do. And when I took that time to just breathe and sit still and call them in and allow their wisdom to come through, it was, I mean, I could shift the entire day just by doing that.
I think that's an important message for the listeners, is that's we are all doing that to some degree. That may not be the only thing we're here to do, but we are all here with the mission of loving more, cutting these cords, healing these generational traumas, and connecting to your ancestors, that they were there for the same reason. And so connecting to them is that tapping into that extra energy. So, as you're going through your life, if you're feeling this, like, oh, this is so challenging, there's so much shit in my family, and know that you have support, and know that part of what you're here to do is heal that. And the way to heal that is to heal it inside of you.
Mm-hmm.
When you heal it in you, it is like a shockwave through the multiverse, and it no longer exists. The darkness that was created from that ceases to exist. And it's through those healings of each individual that we are slowly shifting the vibration of the planet, the bigger dream of everybody that exists. And as we get that, the momentum is building, and the more we do that. So
Right.
if you're listening to this and you're feeling like you're going through all this stuff, access those ancestors. Pick up our book. It's launching on June 21st. Suzanne gives you a way to learn to access your ancestors and use that energy, use that power to heal yourself and all of that timeline that exists before and after. it it's shifting huge energies. It's shifting the universe. It's incredible stuff.
And people that start to do this work, they don't understand that it's going to have that kind of a ripple effect. And so we're literally physically watching you dance between 3 generations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. And then when you also bring awareness to it, as soon as there's awareness to it and you set your intent to do that, then it's even more powerful, because in the beginning, you're like, I don't even know where to go. I don't even know where to start. But once you understand it and there's awareness around this multidimensional healing that's happening, then you can go in even deeper, set
Mm-hmm.
more intent, ask for more help. And then the healing happens even faster.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And actually, back what you were saying, Seth, too, about, we, on some level, we come in knowing our journeys, or, having some awareness. I recently, it was back, I guess it was actually when Stephanie first invited me to go on this trip to Payo and be an author in the other book. And that, kicked up all sorts of stuff for me. I'd never written before. And I mean, at least not in any way where I'm putting it out there. I, posted on Facebook or something, and so I actually got still then. I sat by the creek and did a meditation, and it invited me to go backwards in the timeline of my life and look for the big initiations, all of those moments that were so pivotal in my life, good or bad, or however, I mean, maybe this is not even a good or bad, but however I perceived them, and it takes you all the way back through to conception, right? So that whole experience. And when I got to that point of conception, or before conception, all of a sudden I realized it was my grandfather who called my soul in to be a part of my family and to do this work. And I had done some automatic writing a few years ago with him, the first time I actually did it, at least with an ancestor. And he was in, well, it's in the chapter I mentioned, he was in World War II. And he basically, in that automatic writing, told me, he's like, I saw a lot of darkness and shadows, and always felt like I had to fight my way through everything. But he's, where there's shadows, there's light. And basically his message was, find that light, be that light, and share that light. And then when I did this meditation back in the fall, it was like he was kind of bringing me back to that. Like, I called you in because we need the light in the world right now. And I knew that your soul, you were that person that could show up that way. And so it was like, I'm sure there was some level where I had to say yes or no and accept this journey, right? But I felt like he almost handpicked me. I handpicked my soul to put it, like, going to give you these genetics, and
and then you carried his warrior heart back down into this dimension to do the work.
But it's like a warrior of love, right? I mean, he did exactly. He fought with integrity and for the right reasons. But he basically was telling me, he's like, you don't have to keep fighting in that same way. It's not about
it's the warriors of light, and right. I think humanity could use a reframe of the word warrior, that it's not always about fighting. Warriors also protect. They protect their family, they protect themselves, and they lead with their hearts. And there's a dedication space and a devotion space to the Divine Mother. So part of our mission too is to redefine what the patriarchal side of us is supposed to do, right? Mm-hmm. So it's very cool that you know, your grandfather literally gifted you part of his heart to bring down here.
Yeah. I mean, and I feel like in some way that was part of why he died when he did. Like his, you know, it was like I said, about a year and a half before I was born. So it was like he was there preparing.
Yeah.
And the other end of that, when he was in World War II, he got injured, and actually they told my grandmother that he had died, which thankfully he had not. But he ended up getting sent home, and 11 months later, my dad was born. So had he not been injured, I also wouldn't be here. So it's to sort of see how these things, like, you never want somebody to get injured, but you know, it somehow shows you sort of the divine plan. Like,
right. We judge these things as good or bad, but without them, what we have today would not exist, right? It's the butterfly effect. If you go back millions of years and step on one butterfly, it could change the face of the planet as we know it, because that butterfly wouldn't land on that one flower, and you know, just yeah, it all happens for a reason. If we stay out of judgment, we can just sit and witness and marvel at how spectacular the whole process is.
And you know, I think that has been part of your medicine, you know, sitting in witness and holding space. That is the divine feminine. And you know, coming in with that warrior heart and your lessons about finding that balance between the divine masculine and feminine within, those were big lessons for you stepping into caregiving.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, and that's coming up again now in a new way. That was part of what I was working through just yesterday, because I was feeling resistance in this time. Like I'm being asked to go back and be there with my mom, and of course my aunt is still in hospice care, and so that there's two pieces of it. But my mom is getting to a point where we no longer feel like it's safe for her to be at home alone, right? And she's, I think, in a combination of denial and ignorance. Like, she can't understand the extent of her cognitive decline. And so she doesn't want to leave her home of 40 plus years, right? Who would?
That's a pretty common transition.
Right. And so I was feeling this resistance about going there, because I'm like, it's just so draining too. I mean, I've learned so much and been given so many gifts, but it's no
hard.
joke, right?
It's hard work. That's shadow work right there.
And I've been feeling like, I feel like I'm finally sinking back into my own space and having time for my own projects and this and that. And then I'm like, wait a minute, I'm getting pulled back in there. And yesterday I sort of reframed it all. And like this time, I think my brother and I are talking about it. We don't know exactly what's going to happen yet, but most likely by June, we'll be trying to move her into a community, like an assisted living community or something like that, where some of her friends live. And so, but there's a lot of action that has to take place between now and then.
Yeah.
And well, so
I would describe it, the analogy is like, just because you've trained for a marathon, your body's ready to run a marathon, doesn't mean that marathon's not still going to take a lot of effort. You still have to commit to doing that. You've done the work to have the strength to do it.
Yeah.
But as we step back into those spaces, we still have to use the energy to do the work. It's not as though it doesn't still require effort.
No, I know. Well, that's it. And that's the other thing I'm learning. You know, I've got all these tools and practices, but that doesn't mean that I'm not supposed to feel the grief and the sorrow and the, you know, the sometimes frustration and anger or whatever. It's still a difficult situation. So I have to give myself the grace to still feel all that and go through it. But what I was going to say, so this time, instead of just being there to nurture and love on my family, I mean, not to say I wasn't doing a lot, because I was doing a lot, but now it's like I have a goal and I have actions I have to take. We have to clear out our house. We have to, and then my aunt's house as well at some point. But it's like, there's these specific actions that have to be done now. And so as this, you know, I've been sort of asked to rebalance this masculine and feminine. And so it sort of feels perfect. Like yesterday, all of a sudden it hit me and I'm like, okay, like, so I've been, you know, first part of my life, most of my life, I've been in that masculine, like, go do all the things, but it was really unbalanced. It was not from a centered, healthy place, right? It was sense of obligation or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I moved out of that into a feminine place and gave myself time to heal and grow and learn and listen to guidance and everything. And now it's like, okay, We got some
Are you
stuff
going back in?
Learned both.
But now,
So this is kind of like the final exam for you. How's she going to do this time? Holding both energies at the same time and doing that agile dance, right?
And still nurturing myself.
That's right.
Nurturing my mom, nurturing my aunt, and caring about us all. But this time I've got like specific things that need to get done, and I can't just, anyway. So it's sort of like the universe is like, okay,
here we go. Next level. You're now in your practicum.
So
that's kind of how I see it. We have to go once we get the teachings, then we have to go experience life and apply the teachings and witness how they're going to shift our lives, shift us internally, and how it's going to shift into our external world as well.
Right.
So it's very cool. I'm excited for you. It's a big step.
Thank you.
It's a big practicum you're walking into right now.
Yeah.
And it'll be very interesting. So your story with your dad is in your book, or in the collaborative book, Shaman Heart, Sacred Rebel.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then your story with your ancestors and listening and tuning in and how to communicate and navigate the world, having that extra support, is in our book, Bytes of Light, Evolving Leadership for the Spiritual Entrepreneur. So there's 2 places that people can go and find your writing. Mm-hmm. And soon, yes, right. May and June.
Right. May 21st, May 20th, I think.
31st.
Is it that late?
31st.
31st, okay, for Sacred Heart, and then, or Sacred Rebel, and June 21st for Bytes of Light. Coming soon.
Coming soon. We have loved having you today, and we are so excited to play with you after our book comes out, and we're going to be doing events and workshops and all of that. Yes. So thank you very much for spending some time with us today.
Thank you both. And
it's been a wonderful journey. I'm so
I feel
excited
blessed and excited. Yeah, I'm just so grateful that you 2 invited me to participate in this and kind of take that next step for myself and share it with the world, and kind of give myself, it's like I've got this new foundation based on what came through to write to work from now and this next step. So
yeah,
it's amazing. Thank you saying yes. Thank you for saying yes to yourself and to us and to the divine plan. And it'll be very exciting to see where we all go this next year.
Yes. And thank you to the listeners who showed up to watch, and hopefully you learned something. I know you've learned some things about accessing your ancestors and using that power to get through the challenges in your life. You're here to heal. So let's all heal the planet together.
Oh, my love.
Shine your light.
All right. Shine your light. Thank you for sharing your time and energy with us. The best way to help us spread this message is to rate, review, and subscribe.
If this episode impacted you in any way, share it with others. Post about it on social media or put something in the comments.
Also, check out our website for upcoming events and books at www.roarrevolution.com. All our gratitude and love.
All our love.
See you soon.